How's it going, Scorekeepers? Welcome to episode 6 of Minnesota Opera's podcast, The Score. On this week's episode, we've all got our Fauci ouchies and the world is starting to open again. What does that mean for the arts and our sanity? Then we're joined by Minnesota Opera's Associate Director of Public Programs, Pablo Siqueiros, who gives us the lowdown on the exciting things coming out of our impact department, before joining us for a fun little game. And there's a cannon! And then, of course, as always, we'll send you off into the weekend with a PB&J, a moment of pure black joy. You know what time it is. It's time to check the score. Let's do it to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of The Score, Minnesota Opera's podcast about classical music and opera and the issues affecting people of color therein. I am Rocky Jones, Director of EDI at Minnesota Opera. I'm here with my friends and colleagues, the wonderful Lee Bynum. Hello, Lee. How are you?
I'm well. Hello, America.
And Paige Reynolds. What's up, girl? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. How you doing?
Good. How are you feeling?
You know, so much better than I was yesterday. That is for sure.
So
I was going
so
through
Paige
it.
got her. Yes, you were. Oh my God, Paige got her second shot, and it was fraught.
Yeah. You know, in all of it, I was just like, you know what? This isn't nearly as bad as probably like actually having coronavirus. So I'm not even gonna, I'm not even gonna be all dramatic about it. But I did have some reactions, some trials and tribulations.
Oh my God. And I feel so guilty because, like, I guess I got mine, like, well, it was over 2 weeks ago now because I can technically leave the house even though I don't. And, like, my second shot, I mean, it hurt, but, like, I still, like, worked out and lived my life and was normal, and I guess I was a little bit more tired than usual the next day. So I was just like, oh, y'all, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And you both had like adverse reactions.
Well, I will say this. I will say that it passed by really fast. Like the worst of it happened in like 12 hours. So like I woke up with like a slight fever yesterday and just felt like really fatigued and that all over like muscle achy feeling that you get when you're sick, or especially when you have like a fever or flu or something. But then by like 4 p.m. I was fine. Sorry for the noise in the background. That's my dog. But yeah, so it wasn't that bad. It was quick. It was just feeling really crappy for a really short amount of time.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate.
It is. But, you know, in the end, it'll all be worth it.
Exactly.
It seems like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. We can end this pancake breakfast, panorama pancetta. I'm over it. And even though, like, I mean, I'm a bit of like an extroverted introvert, I guess ambivert. So it's like I would prefer to be at home in my basement, unless like I absolutely have to be, and then like I'm cool. But like I'm just like I'm so done. I'm so over it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I miss the world.
I just want to like even just like the idea of like, ooh, getting on a bus and going to my office. Ooh. How exciting.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So Damien and I, my husband and I, had our second shots on Friday. He, of course, was completely fine. I was laid out after mine. But we finally just like went on a walk yesterday just to the ATM. We don't really live near an ATM, so it was actually something of a lengthy walk, but it was the first time since we moved here that we actually were like outside. We didn't have masks on. We were comfortable moving around and just like got to see the area in which we now live. I got to take some pictures. Since I didn't have a mask on, I was smiling at people. People were smiling back. It was really, really nice. And when I got home from the little walk yesterday evening, I was like, I like miss being in the world. And I too am an introvert, and I think of myself as an introverted introvert. Like I enjoy people, especially in small groups, but I'm not like a big room full of people kind of a person, which requires me to stretch a lot in my professional life. And when the pandemic started, I was as happy as a pig in slop. Like the fact that I could just be at home all the time, no one was coming over, no one was asking me to go anywhere.
Preach.
I was so happy.
Yes.
And then, like 16 months later, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'd love to be outside and get some of that oxygen that everybody's been talking about. So it was so good to just like leave our house yesterday, and I think I'm going to leave my house again sometime the next few days. So this might be my new thing, going places. I'll tell you how it goes.
Look at you, fancy. It's so funny because my husband is an essential worker, so he's been going to work this entire time, which has been just an emotional minefield, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. But, obviously I trust him that he is safe and taking all of the necessary precautions, and he's actually believes that COVID-19 is a real thing and does not want to bring it home. But it's so funny because it's like he's so used to being out in the world and just like, taking all the necessary precautions to be out in the world. So it's like when I leave the house like every 2 weeks to like maybe go to like Costco or Target or something, he'll just like look at me and I'll just be like looking out the window like, oh look over there. Look at that tree, it's blooming. Oh my goodness, they have a new plants in their front yard. Oh my god. And he's like, it's like a dog like looking out the window.
Yeah, who knew a year in the house would like have this effect literally on all of us? Like I think so many of us are going to feel like different versions of ourselves in the next couple of months, and I can only imagine the misadventures of being back in the office in every conceivable direction. I think that's going to be like a type of sensory overload that I'm probably not ready for in this exact moment.
I mean, this summer, Paige, if I were your age, it'd be over.
You know what? There's a part of me that's just like, yes, hot girl summer is on. But then there's another part of me that just like sounds like, it's like, wow, that just sounds overwhelming, honestly. Like, I need to ease back into being with people again, for real. I mean, yeah, especially like a large crowd. Like, if I think of something like the, like, bars I was going to before, or, you go out dancing, or concerts, and now the thought of that, it's kind of exciting, it's also a little bit anxiety inducing, like, being around that many people, like, who could potentially be touching me or be near me in my bubble when it's been just us in my house. I have to ease into it.
Absolutely, because it was weird. It was like beforehand, it was like we had sort of desensitized ourselves to the idea of sort of like, because before it was just like, oh, well, if I get on the bus, I might get the flu, right, or someone might shoot me. And we kind of got like desensitized to that. And now it's just like, it's like this electric, like I just sort of have like an exposed nerve. And it's like every time I go outside, it starts to tingle. But speaking of large crowds, governors all over the country are beginning to loosen those restrictions. And that's a big part of that. It's going to affect the arts, and we're going to have live performance again. We already know in May, Broadway shows in New York will be opening at limited capacity. They'll be able to go to full capacity in September. We know that Wicked, The Lion King, Hamilton have already announced that they will be going full capacity on September 14th. Here in the Twin Cities, the Minnesota Orchestra will be doing live concerts in June. The Guthrie will open up to the public pretty soon in a few weeks, and they will be having live performances again in the fall. And of course, you know, we at Minnesota Opera, we're planning things, which we will tell you about, I'm sure, in a few weeks, so stay tuned. But with all of this opening and the arts opening up again, you know, how are you all feeling and reacting to that? It seems like it's all just sort of happening at once, like the way, like, you know, a garden will just be dormant all winter and then all of a sudden it's in full bloom. It's kind of wild.
It really is, and I'm also curious, and I want to hear from you in particular, Paige, because I know that you aren't just a lover of theater, but you are also a maker of theater. And how are you thinking about this moment where, you know, you must have been so eager to be able to put yourself in a situation again where you could be on stage, be on front of people, share what it is that you do? Is this exciting, or is this also anxiety inducing?
It's a mix of everything, honestly. I mean, I am excited to be able to share space with people again in any kind of performing arts setting, whether I am performing or stage manager or just watching something or whatever. Just like there's just like something that can only be like translated through being there in person and sharing space at the same time. So I'm just excited for that experience again. But I think I can probably speak for a lot of other theater makers are, I mean, anxious about just the COVID safety, of course, but then wondering, like, has anybody internalized any of the lessons of the past more than a year now? Or are we just like everyone's rushing to open up and just get butts in seats again and go on with business as usual? That, like, I'm not excited about. Or I won't say not excited about, but I guess a little possibly cynical, skeptical, skeptical of. Yeah.
With good reason.
Yeah.
I would say.
Absolutely good reason. You're not wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, I think that the thing that's complicated, right, and I feel like we learned a lot about how Americans think and how Americans relate to their perceptions of what our freedoms are, right, in this time, and where people are in terms of thinking about what their personal responsibility is and what they should be doing, and that's also driving a lot of my nervousness. I am super excited at the possibility of being able to like go into work and meet a group of coworkers I've had for the last 8 months, but never like seen in person, kind of a thing. Like there's lots of pieces that are super exciting to me. And then at the same time, we keep having new surges because people, I feel like I'm about to sound like somebody's grandparent or something, but like people are given an inch and then they suddenly take a mile, right? And aren't being very thoughtful about how we have to ease back into this and the choices we have to make, and the fact that, we're dealing with something. It's like this once a century kind of natural disaster, and we do have to change our behavior. We have to change our thinking. We may not ever go back to being able to behave in some of the ways we did in the before times, right? And I think that's a very complicated thing. And I might have mentioned on this podcast, I know I've mentioned to the two of you, that when all of this started in, I guess, December of 2019, my husband was working in Hong Kong, and I was going back and forth quite a bit between New York and Asia, and seeing the differences in how people were taking some of the government regulations in Singapore and Hong Kong and soul in particular, and the differences in how people interpreted those here, I think says a lot about how it is that we managed to have, what, like 4 different waves, like 4 distinct waves. I remember a moment last year in New York when it seemed like we had gotten out of the worst of it. So, because it was New York, everybody's natural response was, hey, it's time for house parties and block parties. And then we had another wave of it, right? So that's the little bit that I'm nervous about. And I love my fellow New Yorkers, but I also know their behavior. So when I saw that theaters and whatnot were opening in New York, you know, like there was a very cynical set of thoughts that I had about, you know, we'll see how long this can last. But hopefully, after so much time, and with the vaccine, and maybe with people being ready to enact a different set of behaviors, this won't be what it has been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and I just feel like, you know, there are so many lessons that we learned during the past 16 months, and I am just so fascinated to see how they will be sort of operationalized, you know, on all levels really of our society, because it's like you said, you look at Asia, and, you know, the reason they reacted so swiftly and, you know, were so prepared was because they went through, you know, SARS a few years ago, and they were just like, okay, well, here's all this technology that we created in the aftermath of that. Okay, here are all the things that we didn't do right the first time. And also just like generally, just like their culture is just about like, well, let's like take care of each other. And it's not like this weird sort of individual, like, you know, libertarian nonsense that, you know, we have over here. It's like actually like our citizens have a right to be healthy and live, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that, you know, everybody doesn't get this like poison breath disease. Right. So, you know, and just so many lessons that we've learned where we just sort of took for granted for decades that like, well, like we get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and get in our cars or get on public transport and go to this building, no matter like if we have a cold or, you know, whatever, and we go and we just sort of sit at these desks for 8 hours, make ourselves look busy, especially like if we only have like 4 hours worth of work to do. And then like we go home and we're tired and we're stressed out and we've been bombarded with all of these people's energy all day. When it's like, no, actually we could just like sit in our houses and we all, you know, have the internet, and well, most of us have the, well, I shouldn't say that, but
those of us who are lucky enough to have
those of us who are lucky to have the internet and are able to, you know, work from home in a number of different fields. Of course, there are a number of, you know, essential workers who have to leave the house. I happen to live with one, and so we need to figure out obviously an equitable solution for them as well. But, you know, I think our relationship to the way that we work in this country, this sort of like Puritan work ethic where it's just like we have to like constantly be like toiling and hustling and struggling, and there's no room for rest or relaxation or meditation, which is where all of the good ideas and all of the good art comes from, when we're able to just sort of like rest our bodies for 10 seconds. So, you know, that's something that I hope comes out of this, like a deeper respect for just sort of our fellow man and like everyone's right to live, and everyone's, you know, especially our elders, you know, taking care of them, like just the way that we, you know, every time I think about it, I get the chills, because like, you know, maybe 20 years ago when I was 20, like I wasn't thinking about like retirement. It was like, I'm going to be young forever. I'm going to live forever. 401k. No, get that away from me. That's numbers and math, and I don't want to do that. I'll do that in a few years when I'm old. And like now I'm just like, and just like thinking about like the way that like capitalism is chugging along and like gaining more and more momentum, and it's getting just more and more just like lethal. Just thinking about like our elderly, and like when someday eventually, like, us millennials are going to get there. And it's just like, well, what is the place for us in that system?
Yeah.
Like, what happens when, like, this system has no use for us anymore? And, like, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, you had, like, politicians, like, coming out and being like, well, you know, you should sacrifice your life for your grandchildren. No, these are our elders. Like, what's wrong with you? So I just hope that, like, and it doesn't seem like, you know, this is kind of, you know, pie in the sky, because, like, you look at what just sort of happened today alone in Congress with Liz Cheney. Like, no, we're you know, lies and truthiness and all of that is still a big part of our, you know, sort of political, societal ecosystem. And, you know, I'm still very, very scared for 2022 and 2024. And who knows what's going to happen. All of a sudden, it's just like, nope, like, Republicans are in power, COVID for everyone. But I just hope that there are enough of us who, like, lived through this and, like, allowed ourselves to feel the fear, allowed ourselves to feel the anger, allowed ourselves to really open our eyes to just how COVID has just revealed the cracks in every single segment of our society, every single, just from politics to religion to everything. And I hope that we can all just sort of, like, sit with that, believe it, and then get together and just sort of act collectively. So that's my hope. Now I'm rambling, so somebody stop me.
Not rambling. I think it was a beautiful wish for the future, and I hope we can all kind of take a little piece of that and hold on to it as we watch all of the tomfoolery happening right now in Congress, because that's exactly what it is.
But, like, but Matt Gaetz, he's cool. Cool. It boggles my mind, but well, thank you for that, Lee. I appreciate that. That was very kind, and I do hope that, you know, yes, it is a nice wish, and I hope that it comes true. But
let's hope.
We've got much more show to get to. We've got a special guest coming up. We've got a game that we're going to play, which is super exciting. And of course, we've got Pure Black Joy. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, Scorekeepers, welcome back. We are now joined by our very special guest, Mr. Pablo Siqueiros. Yay. Hello, sir.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I feel so honored that you guys had me on your podcast.
Oh, well, we're honored that you said yes. Yesterday.
Right.
So one thing that we kind of realize is that, like, one thing that, like, I mean, we talk about, like, the state of the world and the state of the arts and all this heady stuff, but, like, we don't really, like, talk about, like, our jobs that much, which are actually, like, super fascinating. And I think so many people, when, like, you know, I say, like, I'm the director of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the impact department at Minnesota Opera. People are like, huh? What are those words?
You too?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can imagine, like, for everyone, right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely like that sounds cool. I don't really know what it means, but good for you. Like,
Like, oh, you're fancy.
Right.
Or to reference a past episode, it's just so important.
Right.
Yes, precisely.
Exactly.
Because it's important.
Just so important. it.
And so, Pablo is the Associate Director of Public Programs here at Minnesota Opera. And so we just want, and he's also our friend.
Aww.
And so we just wanted to bring him on and just talk about some of the cool stuff that we're doing at Impact, some of the cool stuff that's going on at Minnesota Opera, especially in the next couple of months as we begin to bloom and open up to the world post Panorama. And so thank you so much for being here again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you guys about this.
So Pablo, first question for you. What does an associate director of public programs do?
Well, I'm still trying to answer that myself. So for those of you who don't know, I think out of the four of us, I think I'm the only one that was in the previous iteration of what the department was, and it's when it was just the Department of Education. So my position before I came to be the Public Programs Associate Director was teaching artist. And that meant a lot of things at that time. I mean, it could mean that I was teaching in schools. It could be teaching at senior communities. It could be doing pre-performance lectures. It would be managing all of these programs, doing residencies and a lot of administrative work, and on top of that being part of the Diversity Council as well, and all of these things that kind of pulled me in a lot of different directions. And when Minnesota Opera made this move to create a new department, which is now Impact, a few of those responsibilities kind of shifted around for me. In that I kept some of those programs, primarily the adult education programs. So things that, I still work with our older adult communities. I'll still be in charge of doing the pre-performance lectures whenever we return to in-person performances. But in the meantime, it's been a lot of videos and interviews and those kinds of things, just to give folks more information and more context around each of the performance offerings that we have. But a new thing that has not existed in, I don't think, any position at the opera was kind of this accessibility side of things. So really trying to address accessibility needs for the company kind of as a whole, which is a kind of a daunting task. But, thinking about who can access our performances, who can access our programs, who can access our physical spaces, our activities, who can be on staff, and what are we requiring them to do, and all of these different things that it's a lot of perspectives to try to put yourself in. But it's been a huge, huge learning opportunity, and something that I do think is kind of long overdue in the arts in general.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. And to your point about the very long learning arc that I think very many of us are on, and I think you've been incredibly game for it, right? And that's been inspiring to me as a coworker of yours to see how you've just rushed head first into this and really taken the mantle on of this responsibility and really learning what this means and what it can be in this context. So could you say just a little bit more about how we think about access at Minnesota Opera? What does it cover? Because it is more than just the physical spaces, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, thinking about, like I said, who can be a part of our programs, and kind of what environments are we building, both physical and digital. Obviously, this last year, most of our activities were in the digital virtual space. So how are we thinking about building those spaces with different abilities in mind, thinking about socioeconomic accessibility, language accessibility. Obviously, we live in a pair of cities that are incredibly culturally diverse, and there's a lot of different languages spoken in this area. So how are we thinking about communicating information to folks in a way that the most amount of people will be able to understand them? So kind of those are just a few things that are kind of coming to mind.
And, can I ask, because this is, one of the reasons I think that you are such a strong person to do this kind of work is that your experiences in the opera have been varied. So could you say a little bit about what it's meant both as an educator and as a singer now to occupy a role like this?
I almost thought you said, can you sing a little bit? And I was like, we didn't ask him to do that.
Thank you for not asking me to do that.
Sorry. We'll just direct everybody straight to iTunes and you can pick up Pablo's latest CD out, Access for All.
Actually, another one of our coworkers one time, Eric, we were thinking about starting a podcast where we just would invite singers on and just unexpectedly make them sing all their answers. And we were going to call it, Don't Make Me Sing. Don't Make Me Sing. But anyway, I'm sorry. Keep going.
I just got like triggered to like family reunions when all of your aunts and uncles are like, "Can you please sing?" It's like, no, please don't.
No.
Don't make me.
Say, I'm not warmed up. No, it
Right.
wouldn't.
I guess I'm the only one who, when I get asked that, like I routinely just like park and bark, like immediately slide into an old nasty rendition of Everything's Coming Up Roses. So don't ever ask me.
Really?
Oh, frequently. Because I love singing and I don't have it in my professional function to do it anymore. So when someone is like, oh, blah, 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 I'm like, oh. Every single time. I love it. Are you kidding?
See, I only do it when I feel like I have to. Like I'm waiting in the wings on the stage and somebody like puts a shot of vodka down my throat and pushes me, and then something clicks in my brain and Sasha Fierce happens. But like, other than that, no. Don't ask me to do that.
Always tipsy in these stories. I thought that was obvious.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Okay.
That makes much more sense. That makes much more sense. Anyway, what was the question?
Yeah. Slightly sidetracked. You were asking me about my varied experiences in opera?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so I started off really wanting to pursue, well, actually, if I take it even further back, I originally wanted to be a choir director before I wanted to be a singer. So education has always sort of been something that I wanted to be involved with in some capacity. I had a really great choir experience in high school. And afterwards, I kind of stayed on volunteering for the choir programs. And so that was very much like something that was in my mind. Of course, at that time, I didn't realize that people could sing for a living. So once that sort of entered my consciousness, I was like, ooh, shiny object. I want to do that instead. And I was very much on that track, did the undergrad and grad school in that, went straight ahead into a young artist program at a company in Milwaukee. And it wasn't until I kind of got a taste of like what quote unquote full-time singing career was that I was like, oh, this isn't actually what I want. And part of the reason was, when my livelihood depended on my singing, that took the fun out of singing entirely.
Absolutely.
And really, once you take the fun out of singing, then it's, you kind of lose this thing that you've cherished for a really long time. And so another aspect of it that kind of shifted my mindset a little bit was I kind of saw that there was a big gap in between what happens in the rehearsal room with artists and with all the creative teams and all of that versus what happens in the administrative offices. and who's actually making the decisions and who has the power in the company and who doesn't. And it was very eye-opening to me to kind of see those dynamics play out, especially once I got into administration on the education side of things and kind of saw how a lot of the things that really I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg as an artist, how all of those things actually came together, and seeing like, whoa, there's some issues here.
One or two.
Yeah.
And so in that first sort of administrative experience that I had for 2 years in that same company where I was a young artist, I was the only person of color on staff, which was a very interesting experience, and not one that I was really ever able to verbalize out loud in that space of like, hey, actually, like, some of what you're doing is not okay because of this, because I was the only voice for that perspective.
Yeah.
So that actually almost took me away from the opera industry entirely. Once I moved to the Twin Cities, I really didn't think that I was going to work in opera again. And it was only sort of by chance that I happened to get coffee with someone who was the teaching artist before me, and she ended up getting a new job, and it was like things just kind of aligned in a way where I got sucked back into it. But I do think because Minnesota Opera it's a very different company than the one that I was working at before, and not to say that it doesn't have a lot of similar issues, but I feel like here at least folks seem to be more open to at least working on it. So I do find that while at times it can certainly be challenging to work in a predominantly white institution in a predominantly white industry, I see sort of like little inches of growth here and there that it's like, okay, like I guess I should keep working on this. Like,
and I'm just curious, I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen that are causing you to, you know, those little inches of growth?
I mean, just thinking about in the last 3+ years that I've been a part of the Diversity Council with you all, I mean, we've done some things. We've, we revamped the diversity charter. We've implemented some practices around like how do we gather feedback from folks. So little things that to maybe outsiders or people who are in our audience, they might not necessarily see them right away because it's not maybe always happening on the stage, or different things are happening on the stage than what we're doing sort of behind the scenes. It's one of those things that I just like, okay, and it makes me appreciate working with you all, because I certainly feel like, unlike in my last company, I'm not the only one who's invested in this.
And just quick plug, mnopera.org/EDI if you want to learn more.
So can I ask about that? Because, you know, as our listeners know, prior to my time at Minnesota Opera, I worked in a completely different industry, at least for my full-time job anyway. I'm curious if there are ways that you see the entire industry trending a little bit more to being responsive to EDI and access issues, or do you feel like it's more happening in pockets or with specific individuals, like maybe this is a thing being driven by performers or writers, composers? I don't know. What are your perspectives on that?
It's interesting because I do feel like I mean, it's hard to make an assessment on what other companies are doing sort of behind the scenes for the same reason that I just mentioned, that outsiders might not know what exactly we're doing behind the scenes. But I do feel like this particular year was kind of a game changer in terms of artists finding their own voice. I feel like because everyone's employment kind of went away, institutions were not really able to hold that over their heads in terms of silencing opinions. Because I do feel like that's for so many people, they're like, I don't want to speak up, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to cause any trouble because my job depends on it, my future contract depends on it. And as singers, you're just going from contract to contract. So like when your performance ends in 3 to 4 weeks, you're out of a job again. So you almost can't afford to be considered by some as problematic or hard to work with or anything like that, or be perceived in that way for speaking up for yourself or for your values or any of that. But when there was nobody working and there were no contracts, all of a sudden you just kind of see artists actually start speaking up a little bit more, and speaking up for themselves and speaking on the inequities of the industry and all of these things that maybe before they weren't able to speak on.
So sorry to be asking you so many questions, but I guess this is an interview, right?
This is an interview.
It feels like a regular conversation.
You're doing just fine.
So what can we do, those of us who are administrators or those of us who are audience members, what can we do to give a better platform to artists in particular to register their opinions on these sorts of things? I follow lots of singers and composers and creatives on Twitter and Instagram because I am interested in hearing these perspectives that I don't think always make it to the places where decisions are happening. So do you have a perspective on what it is the rest of us can do around those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I do think a big thing is kind of listening to these people as individuals. So whether that's, following their artist social media accounts or things like that. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on this year, which we haven't really done a whole lot of in the past. So we did our Artists Offstage web series, which was interviews with each of the resident artists. And one thing that I was really wanting to get out of those was actually just to get to know them as people, probably maybe more so than the work that they do for the company. Because a lot more stuff comes out in those types of conversations than when you're just asking them to give their thoughts on the next production that they're going to be in. And, I'm just, to be honest, I'm so tired of hearing interviews with artists where it's just like, what's your favorite role? And, tell us your most embarrassing onstage story. Like, okay, like, you're not getting to know them at all as an individual, or what they believe, what they're passionate about, what their life is like outside of the rehearsal room or outside of the performance on stage. I do feel like we need to give a bigger platform to that part of the artist, equally or sometimes even more so than what they're going to be doing on a particular performance.
I love that. So, I know that you have been working on these, interviews, these podcasts all year. Where can people find those if they want to listen?
Yeah.
Or watch?
So a lot of these interviews will be posted on our Instagram, our Facebook page, YouTube channel. Pretty much in any of those, you can just search Minnesota Opera or MN Opera and stuff should come up. I'm also doing another podcast for our creative aging program, Opera Connections. You can find that on SoundCloud. If you just search Minnesota Opera on there, some stuff should come up. Whether that's the podcast that we just did. It's 6 episodes on Albert Herring. Previously, it was like 10 episodes on Don Giovanni, and you can find some behind-the-curtain interviews with Andy Whitfield, our chorus master. So there's a lot of things to listen to that are kind of educational and things like that.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah. Like a lot to dive in and binge.
If you want to just like hear me ramble on about what I think about certain operas, just go listen to that.
Well, we might hear a little bit more coming up.
Yeah.
But I do want to just make sure that we create some space because, I think one thing we haven't said yet, it's just specifically that, the impact department at Minnesota Opera encompasses our education programs, our community engagement programs, as well as our equity, diversity, and inclusion programs. And so, in the next few months, we've got stuff coming up. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make some space. What's going on? What should people know? What can people participate in or see or watch or do or...
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that is coming up is all of our summer camps and workshops and things of that nature. So if you have kids that are in middle school, high school, college, there's something for everybody there. One thing that I find, and this is sort of tying back to an earlier question of like how we approach this work. I think one of the big things that is really important to key in on in terms of the shift from being solely an education department to impact, and education being a part of that, is that it really does shift our approach from we are the holders of knowledge and we are here to impart you and enlighten you with all of this information. And whatever happens beyond that is none of our business. Not to say that is exactly how we did things before. That is not how we did it. But I think impact really kind of flips the script a little bit in terms of what change do we actually want to see in the community and how are we building our programs to match that, which is just a very different approach to how we've done things before.
Right. And if I could just add to that piece, because I love how you phrase that, Pablo, and I feel like one of the things that in my head is different about an impact department and an education department is I think of this as being much more of a series of partnerships with communities around what it is that they want to see in terms of education and programming, and instead of kind of thinking about what it is that we're doing simply as attendant to what's happening on the main stage.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so I always say this, but like we want to hear from you as well, because like that change in the community that we all want to see, y'all are the community. So make sure that you get in touch with us, the Score at mnopera.org, and let us know what's going on and how we can be of service. So thank you so much, Pablo. I hope that was painless.
Totally painless. Just like vaccines. Totally painless.
Well, you weren't here for the last segment. Yeah, we got into that a little bit. But coming up, we're going to play a game. Do you want to join us, Pablo?
I'd love to.
Yay! Okay. All right. Well, we will be right back, and we're going to play a game, an opera game. Yay! All right. We're back with a brand new segment. It's either going to be, in Paige's words, super fun or a hot mess. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to predict some sort of combination of the two. But we want to play a little game where, we sort of look at, well, here, let me start with a controversial statement. there are operas in the canon that are problematic.
What?
I know.
Say.
Have you heard?
Had no idea.
I don't know if you heard. But, one of the big, sort of questions that has plagued Minnesota opera especially, but I think opera companies around the world, is, how do you continue to perform these more problematic offerings in the canon and do it in a way that feels responsible in 2021, that doesn't feel actively harmful. And that is not to say that every single opera in the world is problematic. Obviously, that's not the case. But there are some that, a lot of opera houses like to perform a lot that, aren't awesome. So we wanted to sort of take some operas and figure out if we could figure out a way that we can perform these operas in 2021 that align with the values of anti-racism, anti-oppression. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but all I know is it's time to play
Fire
That
Canon!
I'm your host, Rocky Jones, and I'm here with three fantastic contestants, Lee, Paige, and Pablo. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Rocky.
So excited to have you. So let's move really quick to our first opera. So today's first opera is Madama Butterfly, composed by Giacomo Puccini, libretto by Luigi Illica and Giuseppe Giacosa, written in 1904. Madama Butterfly tells the story of 19th century Japan. An American Navy officer named Pinkerton marries a 15-year-old girl named Cho-Cho San. Okay.
Just kind of hangs in the air, doesn't it?
I mean, okay. Never intending to take his vows seriously, so F-boy. He leaves he leaves his butterfly behind, promising to return. When he does finally return, it is discovered his bride has borne him a child. The officer has in the meantime married, quote, a real American bride, unquote, and visits Butterfly with his new wife so that they can take her child from her and raise him as an American. And I'm very sensitive to these issues because the Portia Williams news just came out yesterday. And I just can't. Anyway, so who wants to start?
When you just hear the plot like that, it sounds like a Maury Povich episode. Like, it's so much.
It really does.
Mess.
It really does. My God. And yet, this is an A title that is performed regularly in houses around the world. Our AAPI siblings have said numerous times, this is not cool. And yet, so the question remains, looking at it through sort of a civic dramatological. Did I say that right? Probably not.
Dramaturgical?
There you go. Civic dramaturgical lens. What do you all think? Do you think this is something that we can perform in 2021? Is there a way that doesn't actively harm our members of our community?
So, based on the framing of that particular question, can it be performed? Could it be done? Could someone figure it out? I think absolutely, right? I think there are a lot of smart people out there who take on problematic pieces and wrestle them to the ground. I think in terms of an answer of who has done that or what would it look like, that becomes a much harder thing, right? Like so many of these issues are very thorny and very uncomfortable. And, I do think that it is possible for people to figure stuff like this out. I think the question for me with something like Madama Butterfly is A, what is the appetite for that? B, where are people interested in seeing this sort of either reappraisal or recontextualization of it? And then C, who may be best positioned to take on something like this, right? So I do believe that it is possible. I don't I don't know that I am honestly the audience for it though. Like the story itself to me is not one that holds a lot of appeal, as beautiful as the music is. And honestly, even when the story is retitled Miss Saigon, I find it deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like it it's not one of the ones that does it for me. And yet I do think that there is a possibility of capturing aspects of this and presenting them in a way that lays bare everything that is problematic about the actual situation that, Puccini et al. Has given us, and still have a piece that people are able to leave talking about. I don't know how they're going to feel, but I am also a person who doesn't believe that we don't take on art because it's problematic or uncomfortable, right? I think my particular opinion of a lot of these things are that they are of their own context and we are in a different moment. And if you just like take the example of TV, like something that was produced in 2016 and you watch it today and you hear so many things and you're like, oh God, nobody would say that now. This feels so uncomfortable. And yet it is representative of the moment or of the people who produced it. So do you throw out the baby with the bathwater, or do you present it in a way that you confront what it is that is unsavory or problematic or disgusting, and let that conversation be the thing that happens before or after, hopefully not during the piece, but that you take away. And like my inclination is the latter, but I really don't I don't know how you do this piece and then make it something that people would feel comfortable with, considering the child bride elements, the Orientalist elements, the complete disempowerment of women, the blatant racism. Like there are other pieces of it that I don't know what you do with, but I do have faith that there are really brilliant directors and designers, performers and dramaturgs out there who could give us something that would be of this moment that we could take something from.
So a couple of things kind of come to mind, and I hear everything that you're saying, Lee, and at the same time, my mind goes to this is taking up space where something better could be. In terms of there will be a lot of people who make a similar argument of but the music is so beautiful. Then I would say like do it as a concert. I don't need to see this story happen. Even in a reimagined way, I have yet to see a version of this, reimagined or not, that I feel satisfied with, or even not enraged by. So especially the biggest part of this too is you're never going to have a cast that is fully representative of the populations that are supposed to be in this story. That I feel like it is, and not to say that because you couldn't, but because most companies are not going to make the effort to make that possible. And so you ultimately end up with people in really problematic costumes and makeup that they should definitely never be in to begin with, no matter how stylized or really trying to be authentic to the original style. It always ends up being something that's hugely problematic. And then there's also the people that will say, like, well, you can't change a lot about this opera because then it's going away from what the composers and librettists intended. And so kind of advocating for that purity of the art form, where the works of dead white composers are just untouchable, or unchangeable in any way. Otherwise, you're doing something that they didn't intend. So from that kind of perspective, the opera industry, I do feel like, is generally inflexible when it comes to making substantial changes, and when they do, they're never really satisfactory, in my opinion.
And also when the composer's like intentions were to do racisms.
Yes.
Can we not?
But also, like, the educator side of me is like, no, like, we should be able to talk about it and all of that. But ultimately, like, companies are profiting from problematic art, and I would rather them give that money to someone who really deserves it.
Wait, before I give my answer, are either of you keeping it or firing the canon for sure? I'm trying to tell what the decision is so far.
I'm firing it.
As an historian, I'm probably not going to shoot too many things out of the canon, but that doesn't. But I would like to say, as a contestant on this show, and I'm trying to win the $10 million or whatever the little prize is at the
I
end.
didn't say that there was $10 million.
However many million it is.
You need to give me a raise if it's $10 million.
If I get this $10 million, you might get the raise.
Okay.
If we, I guess the way I think of some of it though, is that the fear of presentism, right, where we seemingly lose the sense of things in their historical context, and because certain things do not speak to us in a given moment, the idea of eliminating it from existence is not something I'm crazy about. And there are pieces that I have absolutely fallen in love with that when they came out in their own time, for whatever reason, they didn't fit. They didn't meet the moment, right? So, like, I don't necessarily think that this should be a piece that nobody ever does again. But to Pablo's point, I think it's a piece that isn't being done correctly or well or satisfactorily, and it should probably not be done until someone can do it satisfactorily. And that's going to shift depending upon the context and the time, if that makes sense. So I know I sort of skirted around your question, Paige, but I think that's just kind of where I'm landing with it. Like, I will stand by the canon with the lit match, but I don't know if I'm going to drop it on the fuse for this one.
I am going to fire the canon, at least temporarily. I'll say, for me, I think there's a moratorium on this piece for everybody who is not Asian and cannot speak to the themes. That's really it in my mind. Like, I'm not interested in seeing it done traditionally anymore. But there are, I think some of the things that it brings up could certainly still be relevant, but it wouldn't be up to white person to tell that. We don't need any more white Cho-Cho stands. We don't need any more we don't need any more white men directing it, especially when this piece is specifically speaking to a particular type of like violence that comes from white men towards Asian women. And so there's a moratorium on it for almost everybody. How about that?
Well, I guess the question is, are we keeping it Or are we firing the cannon? It sounds like we've got Lee 1 vote for keep it. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 votes for fire the cannon?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, I guess
With
we're
cats.
firing the cannon. All right. Let's move on to opera number 2. So, opera number 2, Don Giovanni, composed by the legendary Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, librettist Lorenzo da Ponte. It premiered in October 1787, long time ago. So, it tells the story of a notoriously charming but predatory manipulative... a notoriously charming but predatory and manipulative nobleman, Don Giovanni, who disguises himself in order to seduce and rape Donna Anna, who is engaged to marry Don Ottavio. Anna chases him off and is protected by her father, the Commendatore. During a duel, Don Giovanni kills the old man and then runs off to chase after other women. Eventually, the discarded women of his past unite to speak out against their offender. The opera ends with Don Giovanni burning in hell, dragged down into the underworld by the ghostly statue of the Commendatore. Do we keep it? Do we fire the cannon? What do we do? Who wants to start?
I'll start.
I see your face.
Start. I don't know. Is this gonna get me hashtag cancel or not? But I personally feel like, and maybe it's because I'm a person who likes like dark comedy also, I feel like Don Giovanni is a redeemable opera, not a redeemable character. Let's the opera. I mean the opera. As long as like we don't act like oh, he's just a Casanova type, or oh, he's just a ladies' man.
Oh, what a cad.
Right. As long as people aren't doing that, then I can deal with it. I feel like there's a way to still have like all of it. Like you can be like, no, he's like clearly like a predator. Like he's clearly like abusive and like attempted rapist at least. Like that we can be honest about that, and I think still like keep most of what was intended in the piece. So yeah, to me, keep it, yeah. And hire more women directors and all over creative team.
Well,
thank you.
There you go. That's the thing.
Thank you. That's it. Yep.
Yeah. So for this opera, you know, I for the Opera Connections podcast for our creative aging programs, I did a 10-episode series on this opera, and it's an opera that I've performed in myself as Don Giovanni, and it's so I have conflicting feelings about it, in that I have really positive experiences associated with this, and fully recognizing that this to inhabit that character really does some work on your mind. Yeah, because I mean, obviously as an actor, a performer, you really want to create sort of the most believable and authentic version of this character. And that was really challenging to jump in and out of that, to be in rehearsal and become this horrible person and step out and be like talking to the people that I was just like throwing things at, or like and be like, hey, let's go out for a drink or whatever. But I do feel like, kind of similar to what you said, Paige, I think this is not an opera where you ever really side with Don Giovanni as a character.
No.
It's not one where you're like, oh yeah, like he's the good guy, everyone else is just like in the wrong, or
They're so sensitive.
yeah, you're just misinterpreting what he's saying. No, so I don't think he's someone who is, misunderstood or redeemable. But I do think the opera, if done in a way where it doesn't glorify his behavior, I think can be done in a responsible way, and again, sort of putting on my teaching artist hat on, there is a lot of things you can talk about around the production that can give you a good context as to what you're going to see, how you can digest it in a way that is responsible, and that is how we intend it to come off. So I would say this one is a keeper.
Ooh, 2 Cupids. Lee?
So I would, to piggyback a little bit on what Paige was saying, I also appreciate dark comedy a lot, comedy in general. And, there are a lot of satirical elements of Don Giovanni. And I think the satire allows us to have a little bit more distance from, the unsavory elements because, as Pablo suggested, it's not asking us to side with him in the same way, right? Like our sympathies are not being moved towards him in the same ways that, like with Butterfly, it feels like our sympathies are being moved in the direction of Pinkerton at moments, and that never feels right. So I feel like with something like Don Giovanni, there's just a lot more space for people to separate what's happening on stage and, some of the more ridiculous elements, like, someone getting dragged off to hell immediately puts you in a situation where you don't have to take every aspect of it to heart in the same way that something that is written in the Verismo tradition is trying to make you feel a certain kind of a thing as a human. So I think it's just an easier piece to deal with. That said, my sophomore year of college, Columbia did a production of a piece called Bread and Roses, which was an adaptation of Don Giovanni that sort of took out the rape culture elements and instead really focused on some socioeconomic elements and made it much more about like unions and that sort of thing. I actually thought it was a really, really not enjoyable production, honestly. But
All right. Well, if you were involved in Bread and Roses in 1999,
wasn't feeling it. So I would
right.
say let's keep Don Giovanni and blast Bread and Roses out of the canon.
Bye, Bread and Roses. Bye.
I do have to say, like, one thing about it that where I have some conflict is the fact that this is obviously not the only opera that deals with violence against women. I'm pretty sure most of the canon deals with violence against women.
I mean, we just talked about one at length.
So, what is the value of, like, keeping this narrative from one production to the next and repeating it over and over again?
Like, we're just perpetuating this cycle over and over and over again. And although it is, interpreted in so many different ways, it's just such an ugly thing. But
yeah, and I do think because it is so common in opera, we've become numb to it. Audiences have become numb to it. They don't see it, or they don't recognize that pattern that is appearing in every opera that they're seeing. And we as companies don't make an effort to point that out either. So
I think that's because a lot of things, especially in the opera, are presented without critique. And I feel like where the conversation happens, where the critique is, where the that piece happens, a lot of times are like in production notes that people may or may not read, and certainly aren't going to sit with them as they're watching something that's emotionally fraught. And I think that to me is where, I mean, every time I think about an example I want to use about how this can be done, it's coming out of theater, which sometimes is presented with, you know, such a heavy-handedness of the, you know, director or the producer's imprimatur that you lose elements of the piece. And I think there is a middle ground, right, where you can present something without the piece saying to you, you're supposed to like this, right? And I'm thinking about something like, again, a play, Susan Laurie Parks' Venus, which is about the life of Saartjie Baartman, the Venus Hottentot. And it's a really complicated and uncomfortable play because it was a complicated and uncomfortable life in some ways that she lived. But what is being presented isn't asking you to say, we should support the objectification of Black women. It's presenting it in front of you to show how completely wrong and dangerous and damaging it is, right? But she doesn't have to say 25 times, this is bad, audience, for it to come across, this is really, really bad, right? And I think there's just a different responsibility and a different type of creative touch that could be put to use in the opera in some instances. But I don't want to get us onto a topic for a different show. But that is some of where I think about this, right? If we're just going to say, let's just put up this piece and not have any kind of conversation around the stuff, you know, it could seem like any number of things are being, you know, tacitly approved, even when I don't think that is the intention sometimes.
Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm hearing 3 keep it's. All right. 3 keep it's, keep it. All right, so we're going to move on to our third and final opera. And that is Scott Joplin's Treemonisha, composed in 1911, finally premiered in 1972. Treemonisha takes place in September 1884 on a former slave plantation in an isolated forest between Texarkana, Texas, and the Red River in Arkansas. Treemonisha is a young freedwoman. After being taught to read by a white woman, she leads her community against the influence of conjurers who are shown as preying on ignorance and superstition. Treemonisha is abducted and is about to be thrown into a wasp's nest when her friend Remus rescues her. The community realizes the value of education and the liability of their ignorance before choosing her as their teacher and leader. Do we want to keep it? Or do we want to fire the cannon? Spoiler alert, I think I know the answer. But let's talk about it. Who wants to go first?
I will go ahead and say an opera about a group of Black people trying to improve their community by getting additional education. I want to fire it out of the cannon immediately. Joking.
I was gonna say, ooh, spicy. Okay.
The dude standing by the cannon right now is very confused.
I absolutely love Treemonisha. I think it's a really interesting piece. It's so different sounding than any other opera I've ever heard. It's a piece that I just really, really enjoy, and I wish were done a little bit more frequently. And I think it's one of those pieces that needs to be reintroduced to the current opera-going population like it was in the 70s with the really fantastic HGO production, which is actually on YouTube.
Yes, it is.
Watch the whole thing and be entertained. But I think it's a really, really cool piece. And it also has a very fun backstory that unfortunately ends with Scott Joplin going bankrupt in his creation of it. But there's a really beautiful aspect in terms of how much he put in of his personal life, his personal resources, his personal network to produce something that I think is absolutely really, really beautiful and thought-provoking and makes me happy every time I hear anything from it.
And I'll be sure to put a link to the YouTube version of Treemonisha because everyone should check that out because it's pretty dope.
So mine is, I want to start by saying it's definitely a keep it. I'm not saying to fire the cannon. However, I have some serious personal concerns about Treemonisha and maybe one of the problematic aspects that we don't talk about, and maybe people recognize it's problematic, but we just don't talk about it because we're just so happy to see another Black piece amongst. But I'm gonna talk about it. It's just that the only problem for me is just that it's problematic to portray Black traditions that some would call superstition, or more traditional spiritualities, non-Christian ones, especially. It's problematic to portray them as being backwards or ignorant or just based in trying to trick people or, you know, as causing the source of chaos or confusion in our community. That's the only part that gets me about it. Cause I mean, I think I can openly say I am a practitioner of an African traditional spiritual system. And so I'm very aware of that demonization and how it has in many ways not benefited our people throughout the years. So other than that, I mean, I love a focus on education, or that a young Black woman can lead, but that could we just get rid of the little streaks of anti-Blackness in there? I would just like to get rid of those.
Yes. I completely agree.
Well, I feel like I can only give sort of a half vote to this because I actually haven't watched the whole thing. I've read about it and I've watched excerpts, but I haven't actually watched the opera from beginning to end. So I guess in my definition of the canon, it would be something that is regularly performed, correct?
Well,
yeah.
So conformed, but also I think maybe a part, and something is enough a part of the contemporary consciousness that it could be in a conversation. But I do hear that corrective too about maybe Treemonisha isn't even conceivably in the canon.
Yeah, I mean, especially thinking about how many productions has it received in the last 30 plus years, or since that HGO production. It would be hard to consider it part of the canon in terms of just for the sake of frequency of performances or productions. That being said, I think it, like you said, Lee, it is worth bringing back into the general consciousness of opera-going audiences.
So maybe rather than keep it, you're voting for put it.
Put it in the canon.
In the canon. All right. So I think that's 2 keep it's and a put it. I don't have a sound effect for put it. Thanks, Pablo.
Just here to ruin everything.
Either way, it's a big yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was our game, and our winner is nobody. Me. I get the $10 million for being the host. Yay! Because I did such a good job. Thank you. No, but seriously, this is a great conversation, and we're gonna keep doing this in the future. I'm sure if there are any particular operas that you all would like us to talk about keeping or firing, write into us at thescore@mnopera.org. And Pablo, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for playing with us.
Absolutely. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, I'm sure we will have you on again at some point at the last minute. But thank you for doing that. You were amazing and brought so much to our audience and helped us learn and grow.
Well, thanks.
And what else can we ask for? All right, thanks, Pablo, and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back for our last segment. As always, it's time for a little PB&J, a little snack for your soul, some pure black joy. And Paige, I know you have one this week that is extra joyful.
I sure do. Hello to all the fellow bison listening to the podcast. You may know about this already. First off, a good HU, you know. In case you don't know, Howard University College of Fine Arts just officially announced that Phylicia Rashad will be the new dean. Yay!
Oh my goodness gracious. That is so amazing.
And you know, I was just saying to somebody, someone asked me about like if I'd be interested in grad school or if I would go to Howard again. And I was like, well, considering that, I mean, A, there's a College of Fine Arts again, and 2, now Phylicia Rashad is the dean? What? Yes. Okay. Time for me to go get my master's. The time has come, but we are just over the moon and so excited. And I'm also excited by this because it's not like she has ever been like disconnected and is just coming out of the blue. Like she visited campus several times while I was there in undergrad. Wow. And has been involved and supportive, as well as her sister, Debbie Allen, too. So I'm just so excited. So excited about this. If you don't already know, Howard University, formerly Division of Fine Arts. So it was actually a College of Fine Arts for a while when it first started, and then got kind of absorbed into the College of Arts and Sciences and was just the Division of Fine Arts and didn't have, you know, the full autonomy of a college. Well, the college has been like reinstated now.
I didn't know that.
Shout out to the late great Chadwick Boseman, because he was a huge part of that effort and was a huge part of us.
Phylicia's now.
Yes. Yeah. Also a student of the department. Of many of the greats who have been through there, and then, you know, gave back in the form of pushing for it to really go back to being a college. So we are seeing that dream be fully realized, and anyone I know who has been a fine arts student there or who has been just a supporter of that department is overjoyed about it. So yay!
Yay! Well, congratulations to Howard University. Good job. I can only imagine what it would be like to go to the dean's office and have Phylicia Rashad standing there to greet you. I think I would die. But also, as the child of 2 Howard grads, that fills me with glee, and a DC native. I'm just so excited. Like, that's so cool. That's so amazing.
It's like one of the best possible things that you could want from every perspective, right? She's an alumna. She's had like an extraordinary career and reach, right? You hear so many wonderful things about her. A few years ago, my husband did a film, and Phylicia Rashad was his scene partner. And he came back with all of these.
Oh my gosh.
I know. He had all these selfies with her, like they were friends or something. I was kind of like abjectly jealous of him in that moment. But like I think this is absolutely fantastic. And there's a part of me that also wants to like quit my job and run and go get an extra BA in theater because I'm not using what I have. So like this is super cool to me as well. So I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, and of course, congratulations to Miss Rashad.
Yes, of course. And I honestly hope that that this can become news that like just shines a light on HBCU performing arts programs in general. I would like to see so much more investment in that area. As we know, like HBCU enrollment is up in general. Like more Black students are looking for that particular environment and particular things that HBCU has to offer. And so hopefully more investment in our arts programs comes along with that. So yay.
From
for
your
everything this
mouth
could mean.
to the NEA's ears. Like, I think that's a beautiful idea.
If any of y'all are listening, yeah.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to go out into the weekend on. I just want to thank Pablo for joining us, for playing our game with us and imparting all of his knowledge and wisdom. And of course, I want to thank both of my co-hosts for being fun and awesome and smart and cool and all of the things as usual.
Aw, right back at you.
And at work.
Yeah, right?
I think it's like really extraordinary that we get paid to do this. Like that is kind of one of the joys of my life, I have to say.
It's really
Absolutely.
fantastic.
It's very true. But as usual, we will see you in 2 weeks. Get at us at thescore@mnopera.org with all of your questions, comments, concerns. Subscribe, leave a review, share it with your friends. And also, Paige, we were looking at the analytics yesterday. We have 73 listeners in India.
Hey.
So I just want to shout out to all of our fans in India. We love you.
Hey.
All right, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks
Bye,
for
everybody.
listening. Bye.